everyone. I hope that you are having a wonderful day. I am here to tell you all about the books that I read in February, and I have a number to tell you about, so I will just dive right in. And the first book that I read, I listened to on an audiobook with the boys, and it was Nate Saint by Janet and Geoff Benge. They have a whole series of Christian hero biographies, and Nate Saint was one of the 5 missionaries that were martyred. This was in the 1950s, and so I think that maybe Jim Eliot is the most famous out of that group. But it was really interesting to learn about Nate Saint, his background, how he became passionate about flying, and how he wanted to use that as part of his vocation. It was obviously a really upsetting end. It's just very jarring, but to know kind of what happened. And I have always been really interested in Elizabeth and Jim Eliot. So to hear kind of from a different perspective, a different focus was really interesting. And I am also planning on finishing. I have started, it's Becoming Elizabeth Elliot. And by Ellen Vaughn, I think is her name. And I'm really enjoying that. So yeah, definitely an event in history that has always kind of captivated me. And then the next one that I read, and it was part of the read-along, was Romola by George Eliot. Since listening to the audiobook, I have started calling her Romola. I know that British scholars call her Ramola, and since George Eliot was British, I think you can call her Romola also, but since the Italian pronunciation would be Romola, I'm going to stick with Romola. It was so lovely to read this alongside Mary from Mary Among Stories, Milena from Milena Reads, and Petra from Petra U. So we did a live show discussion. It was so lovely to hear their thoughts, and they all enjoyed it. I'm always nervous with kind of such an intense book as this, recommending it and getting other people to agree to read it with me. But I think we all really enjoyed it, even though it is a pretty challenging book. And I will link our live show discussion. So it was so lovely hosting with those ladies. And then the next book that I finished and I really thoroughly enjoyed was The Nature of a Lady by Roseanna M. White. In February, I was definitely in the mood for more kind of domestic romances. And I found several historical romances that I thoroughly enjoyed, and this was one of them. And what I also liked about it is that it had an element of mystery in it. And it's all about our main character who goes off to the Isle of Scilly one summer. And she goes with her maid. They're going, in theory, to stay with family. And then when they get there, the maid's like, just kidding. I don't have family that stay here. So we're just going to rent a house for ourselves. It's set in the Regency era, so it is kind of unconventional. You do have to suspend your disbelief a bit. But it was really cool to read a fictional book in that setting because I had just read in George Eliot's journals her talking about how beautiful the Isle of Scilly is. And it was such a lovely, good old-fashioned fun style of story. And there, like I said, there are some mysterious elements. There are smugglers involved. There's also some delightful romance. And it's the first in a series. So I'm very excited to continue on with this series. And I'm hoping to count the next one for a March Mystery Madness read because there are plenty of mystery elements in it. So I think it totally fits. And then the next book that I read, and this was an audiobook with the boys, was Lunch Money by Andrew Clements. I have loved Frendel and The Last Holiday Concert by Andrew Clements. Unfortunately, this one didn't really do much for me. It was too long. I think these stories that are kind of, I don't know, don't necessarily have that much emotional depth, or maybe it was just the concept for the story that wouldn't interest me. Maybe it wasn't necessarily too long. It's all about these 2 classmates that start out as kind of enemies and eventually form an alliance. They both love to make money. They're both very economically minded, and they start their own separate comic book businesses. And then eventually they band together. So I don't know. It was just so. I think it was just something that didn't interest me as much. But I definitely still want to try more Andrew Clements books because he's a really fun middle grade author. And then the next one is The Lord God Made Them All by James Herriot. I cannot for the life of me find my copy, so it's in the house somewhere. I don't know where it is. And I just adore this series. What I really loved is seeing Siegfried and James. They feel very grown up in this one. They're both married with children, and you kind of in the beginning when you meet Siegfried, you're not sure if he's really interested in getting married and having children. So I really liked that kind of turn of events. And then later on, you do have some interactions with Tristan, and he's really grown up as well. So it's a neat new stage of the story. And also a few anecdotes about his children, and just all in all, a marvelous series. And I think I will just close out this spring. I will close out the series with Every Living Thing. And I love it so much. The next book that I read, another romance, was A Game of Hearts by Joanna Barker. I gave this 5 stars. I did a very gushy review of it on Instagram, and I love Joanna Barker's writing. So I'm so excited to read all of her books. And I've only read 2 novels and 1 novella, and have adored them all. So I definitely want to keep reading through her catalog. And this one is about Tristan and Marigold. And they have known and annoyed each other for as long as they can remember. It also involves archery. Marigold is part of a she's trying to be part of an archery society, but there's certain kind of grumpy old men in the community that think she has no place belonging in the archery society. And something that I love in enemies to lovers romances is the verbal sparring that happens. Because there is so much chemistry between the 2 leads. I heard someone say that the opposite of love is indifference. And these 2, definitely, they are not indifferent towards each other. And so it was just such a fun start to the book with all the verbal sparring. And then slowly they start to melt each other's hearts. And then they fall in love. And it was very sweet. And just a really great Regency romance if you are looking for more of those. And it's a sweet romance too. And then the next one that I read, this was for the Kindred Spirits book club, and that is The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford. This, unfortunately, was a very disappointing reread. I had elevated it to such a degree in my mind that I just thought it was going to be a mind-blowing reread, and unfortunately it wasn't. You're reading about a lot of unlikable people doing terrible things to other people. And whereas you kind of have a moral absolutism framework in Wuthering Heights, there's not that in this. It's very moral relativism heavy and kind of just, you should do whatever you want if it makes you happy, whatever that means. And yeah, just selfish people and selfish ends and means. The only reason why I came out feeling, kind of glad that I had reread it is that the writing is stellar. She really knows how to tell a story, and I did thoroughly enjoy the discussion of it. But I definitely won't be returning to this for a long time, if ever. So yeah, unfortunately, that is a risk you run when you reread books. Then the next one that I read was Emily Davis by Miss Reed. This one was a middling misread for me. There are certain misread books where there are a bunch of little vignettes all together. So it's essentially like reading a short story collection, and I am just not big on short story collections. It always happens that most of them I'm not that interested in. And the ones that I am interested in, I'm just sad and disappointed that there aren't more about that section of the story that I loved. So I did like the notion of there's this character that passes away, and then you're seeing kind of all the ways that her life touched people in ways she may not have even realized. I think that is cool. That being said, I just did not enjoy it nearly as much as some other misread books. Now, I know that the upcoming ones that we have, I think, are very story heavy. So hopefully I will get on with the next one better. Then the next one that I read was The Vanderbeekers on the Road by Karina Yang-Gleiser. And this was definitely a reading highlight of the month for me. I adore the Vanderbeekers series. It might be my favorite middle grade series. And in this one, the Vanderbeekers go on a road trip all the way from Brooklyn to California. And it was just a sheer delight being with this family again. Now, I do know that the next book, the 7th book, will be the final one in the series. And while I'm very sad that the series will be done, I think there are some series that just run into the ground and they aren't that good at the end. So I think there's something to be said for quitting while you're ahead. And I will definitely be reading the final one in that, and then just starting a reread of the entire series. And then the next one that I read was Speaking from Among the Bones. This is the 5th Flavia de Luce book by Alan Bradley. And I did this as a buddy read with Kate from the novel Nomad. And I had forgotten how amazing this series is. I think it had been about 5 years since Kate and I had read a Flavia de Luce book. And the writing is so delightful to be with. And I listened to the audiobook narrated by Jane Entwistle, and I just adore her narration. She's so good. And I saw actually that on Hoopla, they have Excellent Women by Barbara Pym narrated by her. And that's the April pick for the Kindred Spirits book club. So I just could listen to her narrate audiobooks all day long. And Flavia is clever. She is so engaging to watch as the leading lady of this series. I didn't guess the ending to it. I do think sometimes that the mystery element in these books are kind of overly complicated and hard to follow, unnecessarily hard to follow. That being said, though, I thoroughly enjoyed my reread, and we're definitely planning on going through more in the series, and I just cannot wait to continue. So such a wonderful, that's a reread that I really enjoyed, but we had forgotten a lot from the later books, so we decided to hop back to book 5, and then we will continue on. And then the next book that I read, and this was another highlight of the month, and that is The Heir of Redclyffe by Charlotte Mary Yonge. I posted about this multiple times in my Insta stories as I was doing my reread. I love this book so deeply, and when I think about some of the characters, I get so emotional, and Charlotte Mary Yonge has this way of just making you feel so many strong emotions while you're reading, and making you feel so connected, deeply connected to these characters. And even though it was a reread, even though I knew the heartbreaking things ahead, I still, a couple chapters, was just sobbing as I read. I could not stop myself, and I just I found myself bereft the next few days. And it was so fun. I read this with my Patreon book club, and I had 2 discussions, and it was just lovely hearing what everyone thought. I think the general consensus was that it starts out fairly slow, and then once it picks up, everyone that kept reading, with one exception, everyone that kept reading was really glad they had stuck it out. There was one reader that it was not the book for them. But overall, it was just such a fun discussion. And I was so excited to have people to talk about this book with. Often when I finish, a really lengthy Victorian novel, I've just decided to read it, and then I have no one to talk about it with. So I really love the timing of rereading this with Patreon, even though the one thing that did stress me out is that I'm trying to get to 25 new to me Victorian books this year. And I was like, I'm spending time on a reread. What am I doing? And also then I reread Ramola. So I was really, really happy to reread these, but definitely I will be treating myself to any Victorian literature rereads for a while. And then another domestic Regency romance, and that was The Sisters of Seaview by Julie Klassen. And this is the first in a series, and I think each book will focus on a different sister, and it sort of has a Sense and Sensibility beginning in that the father of the family, who they would inherit from, he dies, but since they're all girls, they can't inherit from him, and they'll leave them the house. That's what it is. But no fancy estate or anything. And so they convert their house into a guest house. And they have people come and stay. And that notion of being at an inn where everyone is coming and going. You get to know the different residents. You get to know the family that is running the inn is just so delightful to me. And this book did not let me down. In this one, we're focusing primarily on 1 out of 4 sisters. There are 5 sisters, so you haven't met the 5th one yet. Something mysterious happened with her. And her romance. And I loved her romance. It was kind of like Me Before You, but without the terrible, terrible ending. And I absolutely adore this book. So the next one comes out in December, and I will most definitely be very early waiting in line at the library for it. Hopefully I'll be number 1 on the holds list. Who knows? And then the next one that I read was from BookTube's own Katie Lumsden of Books and Things fame. This was so well written. Katie, you are such a stellar writer. I was just in awe of her skill, making you want to turn the pages. Instantly, I was hooked. I also felt really jumpy as I was reading. The sustained tension building throughout here is supreme. And just how authentically Victorian the atmosphere makes you feel. I loved the big cast of characters that we got to know, while also it felt very isolated away at Hartwood Hall. You're following Margaret Lennox as she is a newly hired governess, and she comes to Hartwood Hall, and there are lots of secrets. She has no idea what to make of it. So I really thought it was very well written. I was just in awe of Katie's skill, and I can see very much that Katie is meant to be a writer. Unfortunately, though, there were a fair number of steamy elements, and just the direction the book took at the end, it wasn't a total hit with me. So I think it's the case of the wrong reader for this. So didn't really love kind of the end resolution. But that being said, it was written so well, and I'm just really, really pleased for Katie and delighted to be seeing this out in the world. I saw that my library actually has a copy of it. So I hope it continues to travel around. And then the next book that I wanted to talk about was The War That Saved My Life. This is a first in a duology by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley, and it's a middle grade duology. And I did this as a buddy read with Jen from Jen's Reading Life on Bookstagram. I always stumble over her name. Anyhow, this series hits me so hard emotionally. You're following Ada and Jamie, and they are living in an abusive home. Ada has clubfoot, and her mother has always made her feel like there's something really wrong with her, and that she is hideous, and that she can't be out in the world because of this clubfoot. And then they end up being evacuated out to the countryside, and it ends up being the best thing ever that could have happened to them. And this to me feels a bit like Anne of Green Gables, with kind of a more realistic portrayal of the emotional baggage that Anne would have come with. I think Anne of Green Gables is perfect as is, don't get me wrong, but I do think you don't really get to grapple with the trauma that Anne has been through. And this series, The War That Saved My Life, and then in early March now, I've read The War I Finally Won. You really get to grapple with that and see how it can really affect a child. Those early years in a person's life are so formative to them. I just wanted to give her a big hug, and there are so many characters to love. So yes, just such wonderful, wonderful children's literature. And then the next one that I read, and I will have a whole review for it, is The Poems of Emily Bronte. So this is Victorian book number 4. And then Victorian book number 5 is The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. So as soon as I am done filming this, I will have some reviews coming for that. Thank you, as always, for watching. Let me know what you think of any of those, if you have read them, if maybe I intrigued you to read something that you hadn't read before. And I will be back with another video soon. Bye.